if you're not learning and leveraging, I think you're only going to get left behind faster and faster. Not being afraid to fail is like paramount to it. Like, it's probably going to go wrong. Just accept that, learn from it, iterate on it, make improvements. I think AI is iterating so quickly that what it was at the beginning of the year is like completely different than what it is now.
Josh, welcome to the Co-Conspirator track. It's great to have you on. I know you are a big-time artificial intelligence, AI co-conspirator in that space, and even automation with what you guys do at Nymbl. And so for those who may not be familiar, do you mind giving us a little background on yourself and Nymbl as well?
Yeah, for sure, Caleb. One, thank you for having me on, and love to chat all things conspiracy theories, nonetheless AI. But background, for those who aren't familiar with Nymbl, we are a practice management, medical records, billing, inventory platform for the broader DME space. But more specifically, we started out in orthotics and prosthetics, OMP. We have since moved to complex rehab technologies, or CRT. And then, a handful of our customers now, and as we're sort of continuing to develop, are in, the sleep, broader general DME, bent metal type distributors that we're working with. So, everything that Brightree, Nico, Bonafide does, we're very similar in sort of like our functional capabilities. I would say, we've been able to help streamline workflow processes in a more efficient manner than some of our competitors do.
So let's unpack that a little bit, just to throw the first curveball of the day. You mentioned helping streamline those workflows. So how do you feel like you're doing it differently than other ERP providers?
Yeah. So, I think being vertical specific, right? As we started on OMP, now we're expanding into CRT, there's a lot of groups that do, powered mobility plus some other devices, right? But what we found our own and, come to realize that each product segment has a very specific workflow. So even like, your hospital beds or enteral or sleep, right? There are nuances within those, and we're trying to tackle them pretty systematically, like one step at a time. So for us, starting out in OMP, one of the big value drivers we like to add, or we like to sell ourselves on, not to make this a commercial or, got to put a plug in somewhere. But for most users, it takes about 1 hour of training, and you're pretty familiar with our system. So from a front end, how to schedule, how to verify insurance, how to create a patient, you can learn all of that in under an hour, right? And that's just part of how we sort of compartmentalize that role of like, hey, what is front office responsible for typically? Let's make sure we do that really, really well. Let's move on to, the back office billing, whoever's dispensing or shipping, and make it user specific, industry specific. And that's how we found success thus far.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. So let's unpack a little bit on how you're approaching AI. Personally, I hear a bit of mix with various providers. You have the wait and see crowd, and even technology providers too, on adopting it in their own solution or service, right? You're like, well, let's wait and see. Let's see how it pans out. And then you have no, we're all in. Let's just adopt it. Let's integrate it. And, what's the worst that can happen, right? So where do you land? You land on one side or the other, or kind of in between there?
I think, no, Caleb, you definitely hit the nail on the head there. People I'm talking with, it's sort of like very polarizing right now. We are on, I would say, not the most extreme, but definitely like all in on AI, both from a product, like how can we integrate it into Nymbl, and also like operationally, how do we integrate our own internal workflows? So I think like there's different use cases for both. And we definitely had lessons learned, right? Like I think AI is iterating so quickly that what it was at the beginning of the year is like completely different than what it is now. And we made a wrong bet early on and happy to give like lessons learned where we had to like re-platform and retool and pick a different tool. But, if you're not learning and leveraging, I think you're only going to get left behind faster and faster.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think there is a lot of hype, which I think is clouds a lot of people too, of like, there's so much potential here, but no one's really specific on the potential, right? And I think a lot of people's idea of adoption is like using ChatGPT to help you write an email, or, use even like on a healthcare side of things, using it to maybe structure some data and right. And help you structure it in a way that goes into Nymbl or their ERP of choice. Right. So with that in mind, with that hype in mind, from your experience, what's the gap there between hype and reality? What does AI look like practically?
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't even think about this talk track until we're riffing or talking here. But tying it back to the value prop we have, I think coming back to specific tool for specific use case. And I think there's a lot of hype around AI can do everything. That's not really the case, right? ChatGPT, even versus Anthropic, there's pros and cons from one to the other. But then, from some of your LLMs, there's ones that are geared more towards, communications or interactions versus data quality and scrubbing. So I think that's one misconception. I'm not sure if it's a hype, right? I personally believe the hype is real if you know how to use it. And, for example, right, there's an initiative right now internally across all departments in Nymbl, to leverage AI in a very specific use case. For example, sales will use, a certain tool to go research companies, to go get profiles of who the leaders are, scrub social to figure out what they like or don't like, craft entry email, work on the drip for that specific logo, right, or that company, and work through that reach out, right? But then for development and let's just say product management, right? Whether it's Figma or other tools like prototyping, creating a visual mock-up, is using a completely different tool, different use case, but not sure if that answers your question or not, or helps, but I think that's how we're sort of leveraging and thinking about it internally.
So let's talk a little bit about the integration side of AI. For the most part, healthcare really is run on legacy systems or systems that don't play well with others. That was kind of the go-to strategy for healthcare. I think for a while, I think that I see that shifting, which is really great. You see a little more openness in the ecosystem that they're building. So how are you seeing AI and, if any at all, being leveraged or automation being leveraged to fix this connectivity issue that we have in healthcare?
Yeah, I'm going to zoom it down from broader healthcare to just DME, right? I think that's where Valir come into play. And I think, for us being system of records, like Nico, us, Bonafide, Brightree, definitely not speaking for them, more just as a generalization. But like you said, I think both pros and cons being the core system of record have a lot of data, right? And each group operates independently. While we try to make tools that help fit everyone, we know we're not going to solve every issue out there. So when it comes down to integrations, I think, having an open API, right? Some people will tout that. Granted, having that data availability is one thing. And I think just pushing it to another system is good. But then being able to pull back, any updates, any, automation or additional work that could be saved is where it separates and really creates that additional value, right? So when it comes down to AI as it relates specifically to data exchange, I think, being able to take unstructured data and putting some structure around it so you can map easily, hey, our patient first name goes into this data field in new system, right? Sort of automatically, or if it can handle 80% of that where you have to check the last 20, I think it really comes into play to help speed up that process, but also gives, groups the ability to really find the right tool that matters.
No, that's good. No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that the intake problem, right, is definitely one of the biggest pain points of the industry. And, Valir, we're seeing just a lot of, especially with APIs do the batch. A lot of them are very limited. And so that, we built event streaming technology to help fill in that gap too, right, for more real-time data streaming. And so yeah, I think there are tons of really great opportunity to not just do the most obvious stuff. I think the connectivity portion of healthcare, I think it's a recurring pain point, but I really don't see many people talking about it either, right? Of, hey, why can't I move this data? It should just be easy, but it's not, right? And so I think that I agree. There's a huge opportunity for AI to step in there.
Yeah, I think moving the data is one portion of it, right? I think being able to integrate it into the workflow is the more difficult. So how do you make that seamless? I think if you're able to solve that, then you bring real value to everyone.
Yeah, totally agree. Kind of talking about those extra steps there. I think the typical ROI that many people think, oh, if I implement AI and automation, I'm going to get time savings, right? I mean, that's really the one I hear over and over, which is true. I agree with that, but I think there's probably a little bit more to it than that, right? I mean, especially if we've seen more than just the time aspect being the ROI for AI. So what other benefits have you seen at Nymbl or in other use cases that you've seen other ROI for adopting AI?
Yeah. So obviously time is one thing, right? I think accuracy is probably another. As humans, we make mistakes. I'm not going to say machines can't, but you can sort of control what that looks like more. But when it comes down to the efficiency and time, I think there's like very real use cases that like translates into dollars, right? So I'm just thinking, like you were mentioning on the intake portion, right? If you have a team member focused around that, they're able to do 50 to 80 intakes a day manually just because they're rekeying. Now they can do 150 more. Not only can they do more, but the downstream effect of now you can get the patients in quicker, you can start getting them scheduled, you get insurance verification going faster, right? And if you add AI into one of those other functions, like on the insurance verification side, now that amplifies that, you're able to then get them to dispensing quicker, potentially, right? So it compounds pretty quickly. And, you don't need, each individual group doesn't need to try to do everything, just like do one thing really, really well. Again, back to like sort of our ethos and our core. And, that will then compound sort of systematically, right? I think just from a R&D perspective for software companies, I think like the top quartile of groups now, what we're hearing, they're able to get 30 to 40% better productivity with developers. But groups like Anthropic, groups like, NVIDIA, your top groups are unfortunately cutting, tens of thousands of jobs. I mean, I'm hearing they're getting like up to 6x return in terms of like productivity from some of their team members, which is crazy. That is taking AI to the max of like, from ideation, getting AI to like help generate different problem statements, help prototype. Now devs are using it, right? And they're getting just a lot more throughput there.
I guess let's zoom out a little bit. We've talked quite a bit about a lot of the outcomes, but what do you think, if someone was really believed the hype, not just believed it, but took the time, took the energy, really allocated their staff, and even from an operator owner standpoint of like, hey, I'm going to focus 2026 to automate, to leverage AI, to really integrate it in a very real way. What do you think that the outcomes of their business, like what would their business look like? What's post like real integration?
That's a great question there, Caleb. Yeah, it comes back down to, how these groups are trying to implement it, right? Like the example we were giving on intake, is it scheduling? Is it creating the patient? Is it documentation gathering? I think those three are wildly separate or different workflows. So for us, our mentality being very prescriptive, pick one, do it well. So, if it's creating patients, like figure out what baseline is today, if we're assuming 30% uplift would be a good target to start, go from 100 to 130 per day, right? And I would say, not being afraid to fail is like paramount to it. Like it's probably going to go wrong. Just accept that, learn from it, iterate on it, make improvements. Like don't shut it down like the moment it failed. And that would be, I think, just targeting 30% like you were mentioning earlier. Like I feel like that's a good benchmark. If you're doing it right, you should be able to see those improvements. Right? We picked the wrong LLM. Like we had a tool, we released it, it works, but we hit a limitation with that. So we literally had to rebuild like from the ground up different tool because of that, right? It was a learning lesson. We were able to learn, implement way quicker, way faster. We have like, what benchmarks in terms of accuracy or output we're looking for. But that was one thing that was an expensive learning lesson. So like, we're talking about jumping on the hype. Yeah, we jumped on early, got something to work, had to pivot. But if you're not doing that now, you're waiting. With groups like us, we're going to know the best tools, the best things to use. And we've iterated 3-4 times before, other groups will pick one.